All right, it is my task to break up the wonderful conversation that I've been hearing as I'm a fly in the wall going around the room, and ask if we can come back together now to report on some of your conversations. And what I'd like to do is to invite a number of the reporters from tables to come up to the front so that we can also record this portion of the discussion, this really important portion of the discussion, and summarize some of the key insights that came from your table. You don't need to be comprehensive. Maybe pick 2 or 3 of the comments that you think are particularly important to share with others. Do we have a volunteer from a table to get us started? Please, thank you. And you are table number 4? Why don't you give us your name and your role?
Hi. So my name is Chelsea Ryan. I am the VP External of Keyano College's Students Association, so I am here as a student representative. Our first question that we talked about, what would motivate an institution to implement learning outcomes? We had an interesting outlook on that. It's an opportunity to show what makes your institution unique as well as what allows you to transfer. So what is the benefit, say, of attending MacEwan? What does a MacEwan student have when they come out of MacEwan that makes them a unique student? Almost like a marketing opportunity to the school. As well, to meet or gain accreditation. We also talked specifically to co-curricular transcripts that when I graduate from, say, Keyano, there's certain things that I've done outside of my learning outcomes in my course. So then with that, in order to make learning outcomes effective, we very well might have to revamp the transcript system, because ultimately at the end, when I go to get a job, I will hand them a certificate that says that I have a Bachelor of Education. So in order to make learning outcomes effective, we also need to almost change the culture around the final just being one piece of paper that says what I have. We talked about as well that some degrees have a certain intuition about learning outcomes specific to the Bachelor of Education. We already basically spend 4 years being told that you are going to have to teach 2 learning outcomes in the K-12 section. Just to touch on one other thing, we talked about what concerns do you have trying to motivate your campus. Administrative overload, the registrar is going to be like, what do you mean revamp the transcript system? There will be teachers as well who will say, we have academic freedom. What do you mean? We don't have to do this because we are able to teach these courses as we see fit. Ultimately, they're obligated to ensure students have a certain set of skills as they move forward. So you can teach University 100 English in multiple different ways, but moving into year 2, the students all need to have a certain set of skills to continue. There is an onus on student responsibility for their education, so getting to the 4th year, even if I follow the exact same learning outcomes as my other students, I might not be the same employable student at the end. But there is a right to determine how you will teach your course, but ultimately what the course will accomplish should be standardized by learning outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was table 4, could I call on table 8?
I saw you staring at me and I knew it was coming. So I'm Dave Allwright. I'm the Dean of the Chew School of Business at Bow Valley College. So we had an interesting discussion also about motivation of learning outcomes. And one of the things that we talked quite extensively about was outcomes as a useful tool for directing the discussion about outcomes and programs away from what might be the elephant in the room, and that's the vested self-interest of certain parties who may be party to that discussion about program design, and focusing that discussion more honestly on what the outcome of a program should look like, rather than, as was mentioned before, the inputs. And the inputs tend to be determined by faculty, by administrators, and other people who have their own vested interest in what a program should look like. And learning outcomes allows you to change focus and look at what are the really important things, and brings more honest discussion to it. So it gets away from what we all know is a bit of a political process at times when it comes to program design. It gets away from that winners and losers mentality in terms of program design and course selection. Focuses back on the learner, focuses back on being student-centered. So we think that there's a certain amount of utility outside of the pure educational benefits of having learning outcomes. I can tell you from my own perspective as an administrator that I spent a couple of years recently ignoring learning outcomes in favor of much more pressing issues. I find myself coming back to learning outcomes over the past year because it really is a useful way of focusing the mind. It really does allow you to bring an honest discussion to the development of program and program assessment. So we can all take away a lesson about what some of the other real values of learning outcomes can be. Did I capture that?
Thank you very much. And since Sandy introduced the importance of mathematics, we'll do a mathematical progression here and go from 4 to 8 to 12. Table 12.
Hey everyone, I'm Robbie Nelson and I'm the VP Academic for the Students Association here at Mount Royal. So the vast majority of the discussion at our table focused on questions 1 and 2, so the motivation or motivators for the institutions, as well as how to compel and encourage faculty to buy into the process of introducing or expanding the use of learning outcomes in the course and program level and so forth, outcomes. So in terms of motivations for institutions, one of the big things is that it is a way to help achieve the strategic objectives of the university. Oftentimes when developing programs, sometimes courses, but especially when developing new programs for introduction, there is a focus on how the program, I'm gonna move this up a little bit. There's a focus on how the programs help to, or how they align with the institution's strategic priorities, how they help to advance those priorities. And learning outcomes are a really clear way to demonstrate this and to help to bring in the new programs that the institutions do want to offer. It helps to ensure that there's consistency between courses that are supposed to be the same and may not in practice, at least without the presence of learning outcomes, be taught in the same way or may not result in the same outcomes at the end of the day. There's an element, I guess, as we discussed, that there's almost a contract between the institution and the students that the learning outcomes help to create, because if there's a specific listing of the outcomes that are expected from completion of a course or completion of a program, it creates a contract because there's a really clear delivery of what can be expected from the student at the end of the day. And if this isn't followed through with, then the contract is in effect broken, and well, something would need to change there. It helps, and this is tying into consistency. It helps to ensure that instructional quality as well as student success is upheld, and that's also standardized and is consistent across the different courses of the same topic. And it plays, as has been discussed before, a very important role in the accreditation for professional programs, and will help to enhance the ease with which programs for which accreditation is necessary can actually gain that accreditation. It helps to build with employers who will be looking to hire graduates of the programs. It helps to build relationships and can ensure greater ease of placement, not only for graduates, but also students in the process of completing a program for internships, if specific learning outcomes are detailed, and if employers can understand what outcomes are coming from this. Because oftentimes, especially when there's differentiation between courses and programs, employers might not know what quite to expect, especially if there are differences between the institutions. And if the learning outcomes are stated, then this can really help employers to know what they are expecting to get, and can help students find the placements that help them to be successful in the program if it's a required program component, but otherwise after graduation. And just finally, it helps to, we said, just on a more general and a larger system perspective with regards to funding, it could potentially help to create a more accurate or better specified system of funding of programs if the funding is based on outcomes rather than enrollment. Enrollment is very broad. It's a very workable way to fund institutions, but at the same time, funding based on outcomes may be more equitable and may ensure a better funding formula than we currently have. Moving on to how to compel faculty, one of the big things we spoke about are rewards in terms of the tangible rewards that can be seen from the introduction of learning outcomes. But beyond that, or I guess tied into that more accurately, there must be a meaningful process of engaging the faculty. One way that was talked about in order to do this is to really bring in students as well. It was talked about that lots of faculty, when it comes down to it, do truly value student success. And they want to help to expand upon this. They want to help facilitate this. And bring in students, even in the process of having students find out from the faculty what they want to deliver to students, what they expect students to get out of the courses and the programs, can really help to initiate the process of embedding learning outcomes in what's expected from the program. And just in with that as well, working closely with the instructors in order to bring the outcomes in, especially in alignment with the cyclical program reviews, can be really important. We spoke about trying to identify key individuals. An example I used here at Mount Royal are coordinators within the specific disciplines, finding individuals who are more, at least logically, invested in the success of the curriculum, the development of the curriculum, but at the same time work side by side with faculty so that it doesn't, I guess, look like administration coming down and forcing it upon faculty, but it's being brought in more by colleagues that other instructors work with day to day. Because one of the big things we talked about when it just came to how to compel faculty is that this needs to not be seen much as a mandate, but instead as a way to enhance and improve program offerings. And that's why it can be seen as an administrative top-down process, but instead would be much better facilitated, as we said, with student buy-in, as well as working with coordinators and other colleagues. So with that, I want to let a few more tables speak, so I'm not the only one up here, so I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to be even-handed, I should select an odd-numbered table. Number 3.
Hi. With the number 1 pick in the 2016 NHL draft, my table dared me to begin that way. I think it also keeps me from getting on the highlight reel. We began our conversation by discussing institutions where we may have course and program level outcomes, but not institutional ones, and talked specifically about the challenges of beginning with the course level or beginning with the institutional level, and recognizing that there really isn't one size fits all, and the challenges of filling in the blanks, if you will, obviously differ from institution to institution. We did agree that the program review process, as I think has already been shared, is an excellent opportunity to fill in those blanks where they exist. There was some lively discussion about using the process for accessing resourcing, and while it was acknowledged that that was valuable, the table generally preferred seeing this on an ongoing basis as a learning tool. And so there was a discussion, obviously, about engaging students as we proceed and revise and setting up formal feedback mechanisms whereby we can hear from students how we're doing, and obviously use that to assess student learning as well. Generally, we came down to a discussion of how we make explicit things that may already exist within our courses. And we really did sort of see it as a task of making explicit a number of the things that we already do. And so we determined that there were obvious challenges in coming up with the appropriate nomenclature. And we talked a fair bit about how that differ across various disciplines, and particularly when we talked about engaging our external partners in this process. And so recognizing that some institutions and some programs have obvious external partners to establish that sort of feedback loop. For other disciplines, that does not exist, and so presents a greater challenge for us. Don't guess we actually got to a conclusion and with a whole bunch of challenges.
And you're at MacEwan University, is that correct? Yes.
Sorry, yes, I forgot to introduce myself. Craig Monk. I've been disowned by MacEwan today, you may be able to tell, and I'm here in my capacity with ACAT. So.
And I think we have time perhaps at least for one more table. Could we go to table 1? Who did decide who their reporter was going to be? Could you give your name and affiliation? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marina. I'm the Vice President Academic at the University of Alberta Students' Union. We had a great discussion at our table, and similar to other groups, we actually ended up with some more questions and answers, but I'm sure that that's kind of a common thread that runs within everyone. So one of the things we talked about is the methods of assessment when you're talking about learning outcomes. So specifically, the way we're teaching these courses and assessing them, meaning encouraging professors and faculties that they don't necessarily have to do the traditional midterm assessment and final assessment. They can work in other metrics to really more cater to the learning outcome they're trying to achieve. Another suggestion that I thought was really valuable is encouraging faculty to really embrace learning outcomes of the whole program, not necessarily just their course. And it was our perspective that that could help them take ownership over the more overarching accomplishments they wanted their students to achieve. So another thing I thought was really interesting was we talked about what students wanted to learn versus what professors wanted to teach. Because that may be the same, it may not be, and I think that that's an interesting parallel that needs to be investigated, because in order for the learning outcomes to be truly successful, they have to kind of encapsulate both needs. Another thing in terms of assessment was how we're actually assessing them in terms of the examination. So an excellent thing that was brought up at our table was if one of the learning outcomes of the course is to analyze things, maybe a multiple choice test at the end may or may not be the best way of analyzing if they really have acquired that learning outcome. So making sure that the examinations that are present are actually catered towards the learning outcomes that students want to accumulate. Another interesting thing we talked about was college-wide learning outcomes. And I know that specifically at the University of Alberta, we're right in the midst of finalizing our institutional strategic plan. So I'm sure lots of other organizations have similar things as well. And should learning outcomes be college-wide or university-wide, and more specifically, if they choose to do so, should they be more aspirational or based on metrics and measurables? And that's an interesting conversation that could tie in multiple faculties and multiple disciplines. And similarly, when the learning outcomes are determined, should they be directly or indirectly assessed? So one of the, I think something we really enjoyed talking about at our table was if a course has certain learning outcomes, do they need to touch every single one? And if they do touch every one, should they be directly or indirectly? And to what extent is that valued and could be improved on? And then lastly, I think this is a good note to end on, is I think it was pretty agreed upon at our table that student success was the ultimate motivator in why we want to pursue learning outcomes, making sure that students are set up for success when they leave their institution to be excellent professionals in the workforce or excellent scholars.